My husband spent 20 years building that house with his bare hands. Every beam, every nail, every line of it carried his heartbeat. After he passed, it became the only piece of him I had left. So when I came home one afternoon and found strangers living inside, I thought I was losing my mind. But then my son said it. I sold it. My wife wanted Hawaii. Get over it. I felt the world tilt under my feet. Grief turned into something sharper, anger, betrayal, silence. I thought that was the end until the real estate agent called and whispered, "Ma'am, your husband left something inside the house. You need to come now." Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, "listening" in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If stories like this move, you stories about love, betrayal, and the strength it takes to start again, please subscribe to Never Too Late Stories. My name is Sorrel Hartley, and this is the truth about how I lost everything my husband built and how I found what he left behind. The first thing I saw that Sunday morning was the open garage door. The sunlight slanted across the adobe walls, warm and dry, the kind of New Mexico light that made even dust look golden. The smell of pine and old varnish drifted through the air as I stepped onto the porch. There, under the chipped layer of paint, I could still trace the initials D+S Declan and Sorrel carved into the railing 20 years ago, when the house was just a dream and not yet a memory. Declan had spent 2 decades building this place with his own hands, one beam at a time, one quiet evening after another. It had been exactly 1 year since the day I lost him, and I came back to breathe the same air to keep him close. But when I reached the door, the lock was broken. No, not broken, simply open. Inside voices, laughter, furniture that wasn't mine. A young couple stood in the living room, paint rollers in hand, a can of beige dripping onto my pinewood floor. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, startled but defiant. I could barely hear myself answer. "This is my house." The man frowned. "I think there's been a mistake. We bought it through Rio West Holdings." My chest tightened. My hands trembled, but I forced the air in, counted 4 beats in 4 beats out 6 to release, just like I'd taught my ICU patients when panic clawed at their lungs. "You bought it," I whispered. He nodded, pulling a paper from his back pocket. Signed and notarized. POA from Griffin Hartley Sellers Representative. Griffin. My son. I felt something inside me collapse. I stepped outside before my voice could betray me and called him. His picture lit up the screen his wedding day, that forced grin I never could read. He answered on the 3rd ring, his tone already defensive. "Mom, I was going to tell you." Behind him, Avery's voice chimed in through the speaker, laughing about sunscreen and boarding passes. "Tell me what Griffin," I asked, though I already knew. "About the house," he said quietly. "We sold it." My breath caught. "You sold your father's house?" "It's just a house, Mom. Avery wanted Hawaii. She's been working hard. She deserves it. You can't hold on forever." Something sharp burst behind my eyes. The world tilted sideways. "Your father spent 20 years building that house. He's gone, Mom," he said, his voice hardening, "and you're not using it. It was time to move on." The words hit like stones. I don't remember falling, but I remember the sound of gravel scraping my palms, the rush of air before everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and a nurse was calling my name. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and rain. I signed the discharge papers that evening, my body trembling with exhaustion, but my mind was clear. I drove back to Tazook Foothills as the sky turned violet. The house looked smaller in the dark, its windows hollow and cold. The porch light flickered weakly, and when I stepped closer, I saw the faint marks on the 7th stair. Tiny, round indentations from Declan's chisel. The ones he'd made the day he said, "This step isn't finished yet. Maybe it shouldn't be." I stood there for a long time, hand resting on the wood, still warm from the day's sun. Then my phone rang. Monroe Nash, our old real estate agent, spoke in a low voice as if afraid someone might hear. "Sorrel, it's Monroe. I know it's late, but you need to listen carefully. Declan left something inside that house before he died. Something he wanted you to find. You need to come now. And whatever you do, don't let anyone else open it." The line went dead. The night pressed against my skin, and the air seemed to hum with a secret. I looked once more at the carved initials beneath the railing at the unfinished stair and whispered, "If there's anything left between me and you, Declan, it's waiting under those steps." The moon hung low over the foothills when I returned to the house. Monroe met me by the gate, his flashlight cutting narrow paths through the dark. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "Declan built this house. If he hid something here, I'll find it." We slipped inside through the side door, moving like trespassers in what was once my home. The air was heavy with dust and turpentine. The walls still smelled faintly of him motor oil, cedar soap coffee. Monroe crouched by the stairs, tapping each step with a small wrench. One by one, they sounded solid until the seventh rang hollow. Here he whispered. The sound was softer, a muted thud. Declan's unfinished step. Monroe slid a thin putty knife into the seam. The plank lifted with a reluctant creak. Beneath it lay a small wooden box wrapped in burlap. My hands shook as I reached for it. Inside was a folded letter, a brass key engraved with SMB 447, and a scrap of paper that read, "North 17 degrees, vent." The handwriting was unmistakable, Declan's neat, deliberate print. I opened the letter. "If you're reading this, Sorrel, it means I'm gone. Don't let anyone convince you to downsize for your own good. Someone isn't who they claim to be. There's a woman using a false name, Avery Vale. I think she's after Griffin and through him after you. Trent Hollis is helping me investigate. This key opens a safe deposit box at Sun Mesa Bank. Keep it safe. Trust your instincts. If anything happens to me, remember the truth is hidden where the wind meets the north." My breath caught halfway through. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling its weight like a heartbeat. Declan had known. He'd seen something I hadn't. I laid the note down carefully and unfolded the photocopy of the sales contract I'd taken from the new buyers earlier that day. There it was. POA for seller, signed by Griffin Hartley, notarized but missing the co-owner's consent mine. "This isn't valid," Monroe muttered, scanning it. "Not without your authorization. That title's clouded. Any buyer could walk away if they found out." We climbed to the attic, following the clue. The air smelled like dust and cedar. I turned the compass app on my phone, north 17 degrees. The vent was there behind an old dresser. The screws came off easily. Inside, wrapped in an old linen cloth, was a small USB drive and a photograph. My heart dropped when I saw it. Avery standing under a real estate sign that read, "Elise Voss Realty Consulting." Monroe plugged the USB into his tablet. The screen lit up with a video Declan sitting right here in this same attic, his face thinner, voice steady. "If you're watching this, Sorrel, she's already here. I've been tracking Avery Vale, real name uncertain. She's done this before. She preys on families with inheritance. Griffin doesn't see it yet. I've split the evidence between this house and the bank. Don't let anyone touch the seventh step, except you." The video flickered, ending on his tired smile. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Declan had been building his last protection for us while dying. I ran my fingers along the old chisel marks again. He must have carved the hiding place while pretending to finish the stairs. Monroe closed the laptop gently. "That's your next move, Sorrel. Sun Mesa Bank, box 447. I nodded, still holding the key. I could almost hear Declan's voice in the wind through the open vent, that low hum he made when sanding wood. As we locked up and stepped outside, the dawn was beginning to bleed over the horizon. I looked back at the house, its windows glinting faintly, the walls glowing soft red under the first light. Avery Vale, or Elise Voss, or whatever her name really was, had no idea the house she thought she stole was still protecting its own. Tomorrow I'd open that box, and whatever Declan left inside, I'd make sure it spoke for both of us. The morning sunlight glared off the metal doors of Sun Mesa Bank as I stood in line clutching the small brass key. It felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of everything Declan had warned me about was cast in that tiny piece of metal. When the clerk guided me into the vault and opened box 447, the air inside smelled faintly of cedar and paper dust. Inside was a neatly bound stack of documents, stock certificates from Declan's old architecture firm, dated all the way back to 1999, and a letter written in his calm, unmistakable hand. "For your financial independence," it read. Beneath it, I found something that chilled me, a photocopy of an information form tied to a name I didn't recognize. Rhea Calder. Next to it, Declan had scribbled in pencil, "Alias check with Trent." By noon, I was sitting across from Trent Hollis in his small office surrounded by maps and red pushpins linking cities across the Southwest. Declan suspected her months before he passed, Trent said, tapping one of the pins connecting Santa Fe to Phoenix. He opened his laptop and played a voicemail Declan had left him. "If anything happens to me, give Sorrel the USB, and call Mitch Alvarez and Harold Keene. She'll understand." I dialed the first number, Mitch Alvarez from Albuquerque. His voice broke as soon as he realized why I was calling. He told me how his mother's duplex had been sold after his new wife convinced him it was time for her to live somewhere better. 2 weeks after the sale, both the money and the wife were gone. Harold Keene from Flagstaff told a similar story. He sold his father's mountain cabin to start a business together. 3 days later, the joint account was empty. Their stories were like bruises layered over mine, familiar and raw. Trent began piecing the timeline together on the whiteboard. "She follows a pattern," he said. "Stage 1, promise luxury. Convince the partner they deserve to live better Hawaii, Europe, anywhere far enough to feel new. Stage 2, create guilt around the parent, make them sound unwell, unstable, or outdated. Stage 3, legal manipulation using a murky POA or forged consent to move property. Stage 4, extract the funds from escrow through consulting fees, disappear before anyone connects the dots." He turned to me. "It's always the same script, Sorrel. She's been doing this for years." I told him about the paperwork I'd found at the house, the missing co-owner's signature, the alias Elise Voss from the photograph. Trent typed rapidly, his screen lighting up with database results. "Rhea Calder," he murmured, "also known as Elise Voss. 2 pending civil suits in Arizona for fraudulent consulting. And look at this." He spun the screen toward me. "A credit card recently opened under Griffin's name with the email contact belonging to Avery. There's over $20,000 charged to real estate consulting." The room felt colder. I pictured Griffin's face the way he'd smiled when Avery first came around, how quickly she'd built herself into the center of his life. She hadn't just stolen from him, she'd rewritten his reality. He doesn't even know I whispered. Trent nodded grimly. "We can still stop the house transfer." The title's clouded, and with that missing consent, it's already shaky. "I'll contact attorney Maya Calderon. She can file a lis pendens and a motion to stay closing. That will freeze the deal until the title company sorts it out." Monroe joined us later that afternoon, his shirt still dusty from showing homes. "I spoke with the buyers," he said. "They're nervous. Once they hear about the missing co-owner approval, they'll hold the transaction." We worked in silence for a while, Trent drafting the legal motion, Monroe reviewing the contract, and me sitting in the corner with Declan's letter still open on my lap. It wasn't anger anymore that kept me upright. It was the rhythm of breathing I had learned from a lifetime in the ICU. Count, control, continue. By evening, I knew I couldn't fight this war in court alone. Griffin had to see what was real, not what Avery had told him. I decided to invite him to dinner at Canyon Road, where Declan used to take us every anniversary. I packed a brown envelope, Declan's letter, the USB, with Avery's alias, and the phone numbers of Mitch and Harold. If I could get my son to read, listen, and question just once then, maybe the house wouldn't be the only thing I could save. That night, as I drove back home, the highway lights blurred into long golden lines. Somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, I heard Declan's voice again. When you can't fix it with force, fix it with patience. I whispered back, then watch me try. The next evening, I would look into my son's eyes and see if there was still something of his father left in them. Canyon Road glowed like an old photograph. Strings of lights hung between adobe walls, the scent of mesquite smoke mingling with roasted peppers. I arrived early and chose a table near the fireplace where Declan and I once sat on our 20th anniversary. I set the envelope on the table and ordered coffee. Every sound around me, the scrape of forks, the low hum of conversation felt distant, as if I were underwater waiting for a storm. Griffin arrived 20 minutes late, his shirt-wrinkled hair tousled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days but didn't want anyone to know. "Traffic," he muttered, sliding into the seat across from me. I smiled faintly. Your father used to say that about time itself, always blaming something outside of us. He didn't smile back. I told him how Declan had once spent 3 years just perfecting the roofline. He said the house would breathe better if the air moved through it. Dad lived to preserve the past. Griffin replied, his tone clipped. I live to move forward. The words stung, but I didn't show it. I placed the letter on the table, then read this. He wrote it for you. Griffin hesitated before picking it up. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. When he reached the line that said, "Don't let anyone make you doubt your mother." His hands trembled. He folded the letter neatly, his voice low. Avery told me you've been confused since Dad died, that you needed help managing things. I felt my pulse rise, but kept my tone calm. Help doesn't forge signatures, Griffin. She's not who she says she is. I slid the USB toward him. Watch this when you're alone. He looked at it as though it might burn him. I don't need some fake video to prove you're right. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the tile. Avery's been nothing but good to me. You just can't stand that someone else is in control now. People turned to look. I stayed seated, my voice barely above a whisper. She filed a petition, application for sole property management with a signature pretending to be mine. You can check the court record yourself. His eyes flickered for a moment, something uncertain beneath the anger. That's not true? Then prove it, I said softly. You'll find the truth faster than I can convince you. He turned and walked toward the door, but as he reached the exit, I saw him glance back at the table. The USB still lay under the glow of the candlelight. His hand slipped into his pocket, and when he thought I wasn't looking, he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of it. He left without another word. I stayed there long after the coffee had gone cold. Around me, the laughter of strangers filled the air, muffled and warm, like life carrying on without permission. I wrote everything down later that night, the time he arrived. The words he said the moment he looked away. In the ICU, I learned that details save lives. Without proof, feelings are just noise. At home, I placed Declan's letter back in the box with the key and the USB. My heart ached with something deeper than anger. It was the ache of watching love turn into loyalty for the wrong person. Still, a faint flicker of hope stirred in me. Griffin had taken the photo. Maybe that was enough to plant a seed of doubt. Before I went to bed, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. When truth knocks, even denial has to answer. The wind brushed against the windows, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. Somewhere out there, Avery was already planning her next move. And I, for the first time in a year, was planning mine. Neon leaked through the blinds of Griffin's apartment like restless water. He'd texted that he and Avery were packing. I stayed home with Trent on speaker while Maya drafted the motion to stay closing. My kitchen table looked like a war map. Declan's letter, the USB, a printed copy of the contract with my missing consent, circled in red. I kept breathing the way I taught my patients in 4, hold 4, out 6, 1 page at a time, 1 hour at a time. Across town, Griffin slid open Avery's laptop to print their tickets. He told me later how a folder called Consulting snagged his eye. Inside sat a signed agreement between Elise Voss and Rio West Holdings, with one bright line in bold success fee 12% on property closing. The signature loop matched the way Avery signed birthday cards. He clicked back, searched the drive, and found another directory. Documents Declan Hartley. A video opened. Declan's face filled the screen a little thinner, but steady the attic rafters behind him. "If you're seeing this, she's already convinced you I'm worried about nothing," he said softly. "She will tell you your mother is slipping. Don't accept the story. This house is a map back to the truth." Griffin froze there, unable to breathe when the front door opened. "What are you doing on my computer?" Avery's voice was light, but edged. He closed the window with shaking fingers. "Just printing the tickets." She watched him a beat too long, then smiled and poured 2 glasses of wine. While he forced a swallow, she lifted his phone from the counter like it was hers, and he didn't notice. She moved to his laptop, typed briskly, and sent an email from his account, "Proceed escrow release tomorrow morning. Griffin Hartley." Somewhere in the city, a server received permission to push the money out of reach. Trent's alert pinged his screen at my house. "Escrow is queued for release at opening," he said. "We file before 8 a.m. or we lose leverage." I called Maya. She adjusted the motion, added the credit risk note, and told me to be at the courthouse doors when they unlocked. At 1:12 a.m., a text came to my phone from Griffin's number, "Mom, stop. I can handle this. He never calls me Mom. He always says Ma." I took a screenshot, printed it, and tucked it into the envelope with Declan's letter. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was the sensation of gears finally catching. Around 2, Griffin woke to the blue glare of his laptop. In his sent mail, he saw the escrow command with his signature. In his trash, the Declan video had been deleted. He checked his pocket and exhaled. He had copied it to a small external drive before Avery walked in. From the closet, he heard the zipper of a suitcase. "We're flying out earlier," she called. "I want to get there and book the Maui bungalow before the rush." He went for her wallet to tuck a boarding pass inside and found 4 cards with his name embossed, each tied to the email address she used for everything. The total stacked like a cliff edge, 30,000 and climbing. He put the wallet back with careful hands and stared at the ceiling until he could trust his voice. Then he called me. "Ma," he whispered at 2:13 a.m., the word breaking in the middle. I was wrong. She isn't who she says she is. I could hear his breath shuddering the way a person breathes when they realize there's still time to turn around. "Stay where you are," I said. "Do not confront her. I'm calling Trent." I set the phone on the table and pressed call with a steadiness I had not felt since Declan died. At 2:47 a.m., the red sign from the diner across the street flickered out. The kitchen went darker. I stood at the window watching the city's faint lights and knew the morning was coming fast and it was not going to be kind. By dawn, the air had the metallic chill of a scalpel. I met Trent and Maya at the courthouse at 8:15 sharp. We filed the Ellis pendants and the motion to stay closing before the clerk finished her first cup of coffee. That anchors the title, Maya said, stamping the last page. "No clean recording without you." Trent's phone buzzed. Avery pulled $62,000 from the company account as a consulting fee under the name Elise Voss. He said then, "Another ping, APD reports her car pinging on I-25 southbound toward Albuquerque." We were on the highway within minutes, Trent driving me in the passenger seat, Griffin behind me with the external drive in his pocket. The radio cut in with the morning bulletin, law enforcement seeking Elise Voss for interstate fraud. My palms flattened against my knees. "You all right?" Trent asked. "I've been all right. Inside worse rooms," I said, watching the desert open like a great breathing thing. Near San Felipe, Trent's phone chirped again. She left the interstate onto a frontage road, avoiding cameras. Griffin dialed her on speaker, layering desperation into his voice with a skill I wish he'd never needed. "Please don't leave. He said Ma is in the hospital." She laughed, careless. "I will live just fine on her money," she answered. Trent nodded at the recording app rolling on his screen. "That'll do." A traffic cam image landed in Trent's inbox. Avery wasn't alone. A man drove while she typed on her phone, sunglasses huge on her face. Former Rio West employee, Trent said, zooming the photo. He set up the shell accounts. "We reached Albuquerque International Sunport at 9:50. The airport smelled like coffee and jet fuel and tired hope. Cameras blinked their unblinking stare. We split without speaking, Trent to security, Maya to airport police, Griffin and I to the ticket counters. At baggage drop, Avery stood in a camel coat and white sneakers, handing over 2 large suitcases. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was too. Griffin stepped out from behind a column. "Avery." She turned, and for a second, her face opened shock, then calculation, then charm. "You came to say goodbye," she said, brightly. "Honolulu at 10:45. You'll love it when you let yourself." He took another step. "We need to talk about the accounts." She reached for her bag. The strap slipped. The wallet fell. Bundles of cash ruptured onto the polished floor, fat, rubber-banded stacks that skittered and spun like dead fish. A murmur rose. 2 officers closed in. Avery bolted. "I didn't think. I ran." Rhea called her. I shouted the name, ricocheting off glass and tile. She flinched. Names have a way of reaching a person where hands can't. "You will die clutching that ugly house," she spat over her shoulder, dropping her coat to move faster. Security netted her near the departure screens, blue letters blinking flights to cities she would not see. She hit the floor hard, lashing, still beautiful, still lying. Handcuffs found her wrists. While an officer read her rights, another opened the second suitcase. Inside, more cash, a thin laptop, a folder of shares in Rio West Holdings. The officer flipped open a passport with her photo and a different name, Linda Marsh. The airport lights glittered on its laminate. Trent arrived, breath even, holding up the recording of her call with Griffin and the escrow command email. The officer nodded. "That's enough." They sat her on a bench beneath the bright, impersonal board. Her mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't act alone," she said conversationally. "The buyer of your house, that was me." The officer shrugged. "We'll sort out the paperwork." He turned the laptop to us. In the draft sat a message to her attorney: "If Hawaii funds don't land, liquidate D&H architecture shares." Declan's letters. Declan's firm. Declan's patience turned to steel in my spine. Across the concourse, Griffin sank to his knees, hands trembling so hard the little drive rattled in his pocket. I went to him and put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't cry. Years in the ICU teach you the difference between pain you carry and pain you fix. Trent's hand landed gently on my other shoulder. "We kept the house," he said. It didn't sound like triumph. It sounded like relief. They led Avery, Rhea, Linda. Away under the white glare of airport lights, her face stripped of its soft weapons. The man in her car was cuffed near the doors, his eyes skittering like trapped mice. Outside, the desert wind picked up rolling dust across the lanes where the police cruisers idled. Griffin stood voice rough. "Ma, I let them take everything Dad built." I shook my head. "No, son. They scratched the surface. They didn't touch the foundation." We walked out together as the patrol cars pulled away, sirens, off lights silent. Behind us, the departures board clicked to the next hour, and somewhere a child laughed and a barista called a name, and the world kept moving. On the drive back north, the sky was that pale metal blue that always makes me think of new beginnings. The wind slipped through Trent's cracked window and wound around us, smelling of dust and sun and something like cedar. I pressed my palm to the dashboard and felt the hum of forward motion. Declan used to say a house breathes when the air is given a way through. Maybe families did too. We had opened a vent the night we lifted the 7th step. Today, The wind answered. Monday light cut through the tall windows of courtroom 4, clean and cold. The placard read, Case number 23, SC 4A172. I sat in the front row beside Maya Calderon, palms open on my skirt wedding band, turning slowly against my finger. Behind me, Griffin kept his head, bowed thumb, pressed to the small drive in his fist like a rosary. Across the aisle, wearing a beige jail uniform and a smile that never reached her eyes, sat the woman who had worn 3 names and almost took our home. The prosecutor spoke first. Charges rose like steps: identity fraud, forged notarization, interstate theft by deception. Maya stood when it was our turn and guided the evidence into the room with a steadiness I tried to borrow. She entered Declan's letter, the original USB, from the attic, the video file recovered from the hidden vent, the bank box inventory, the photocopied contract missing my consent, the text from Griffin that said Mom instead of Ma. The clerk marked each exhibit. The judge's glasses flashed in the pale light. They called me to the stand. I told the truth like I was charting a patient date's vitals observations. The open door, the strangers painting my walls, the contract that said I had agreed when I had not. The night we lifted the 7th step and Declan's handwriting looked back at me like breath returning. The chase to the airport, the cash, the passports, the other man in her car. When I finished, I felt neither empty nor triumphant, just level like a heart rate that had steadied. Then she spoke. I was only a middleman, she said, that practiced warmth gone brittle. A shareholder at Rio West wanted the property. I facilitated. She shrugged toward the table of exhibits. I didn't force anyone. The room held its breath. Maya rose again, slid a packet forward, and asked the judge to take judicial notice. The document listed a buyer, an LLC controlled by Elise Voss. The manager's signature was hers. It's called a self-purchase, Maya said. She bought the house from herself with a mask on. Trent testified next. He traced the shell Rio West Holdings with no doorbell, no office, no payroll, only a tax number already tied to her Phoenix filings. He explained the escrow consulting fee and the route the money took before it surfaced as cash inside her suitcase. Finally, a digital forensics officer described the recovery of an email draft to her attorney, instructing the liquidation of shares in Declan's old architecture firm if the Hawaii funds failed to land. The plan was never about a vacation. It was about stripping the bones. The judge allowed allocution. I turned to her and asked the single question that had haunted me. Why my son? She leaned forward, eyes bright and flat. Because he was easy, she said. Like you. That house should belong to somebody who knows how to use it. I felt the old anger rise and pass like a wave breaking. It belongs to the hands that built it, I said, and to the people who keep their promises. A chair scraped softly. Griffin stood the drive, trembling in his grip. My father saw this coming, he said. I made it possible. I'm here to help repair what I broke. He handed the drive to the bailiff. The court lights dimmed a fraction as the screen flickered on. Declan appeared in the frame beneath our attic rafters, thinner but certain. If you're seeing this, he said, remember, our house is not just walls and roof. It's a vow. The room went still enough that I heard the heat tick inside the vents. For the first time since her arrest, she looked down. The judge read the ruling without drama. The sale was void. The title was quieted in my name. All proceeds seized from her accounts were forfeited. And for the crimes proved and the pattern shown, she received 15 years in federal custody. A gavel fell. Paper whispered. Somewhere in the hallway, a copier hummed to life. I closed my hand over my ring and thought of the day Declan set the first post in the ground and laughed when it leaned, then fixed it and called that Patience Love by another name. When the bailiff let her out, the beige cloth of her uniform swallowed the last of her poise. Griffin touched my shoulder. I don't deserve to come home, he said. Then earn it, I answered, and felt the house miles away draw one long, relieved breath. Summer laid a thin gold over the adobe, and the foothills smelled like hot dust and sage. 3 months after the verdict, the house was ours, and also partly broken hairline cracks along the plaster-scuffed banisters, a long trail of boot prints nobody would claim. We started where Declan would have started sweep, sand, seal. Monroe brought coffee and a belt sander. Griffin brought apology and a willingness to learn. I brought the box from the bank and set it on the hearth like a promise we'd keep opening. Work makes grief obedient. We stripped a wall and found a faint pencil scrawl across old Paint Keep building. The letters were Declan's, small and tidy, the way he labeled jars of screws. Griffin laughed softly when the sander kicked. He would have hated that sound, he said. He would? I answered. And then he would have taught you how to love it. We replaced the railing together, Monroe guiding Griffin's hands so the nails went in straight. Each strike landed with a low thump that matched the tempo of my blood. One afternoon I returned to the bank box to close it out and found a final envelope tucked beneath the stock ledger, as if it had been waiting for the right weight of time. The note was dated the day Declan went to the hospital. "If you're reading this," he wrote, "it means we're still building, just not from the same room." I sat on the floor with the paper open on my knees until the sun shifted and the tile warmed my legs. He had known, and instead of writing a goodbye, he'd left me a manual. I sold a sliver of the D&H architecture shares and sent checks to 2 men who would understand Mitch and Harold, with notes small enough to fit in the palm, "For your mother's memory, for your father's hands." Maya called that week to say the defendant had accepted her sentence and named other partners in 3 states. The news filled the rooms without echo. Justice is quiet when it finally arrives. One evening, painting the front door a deeper red than before, Griffin stopped and leaned his head against the jamb. "I miss Dad," he said, not looking at me. "Let the missing be a foundation," I said, "not a weight." We took our dinner to the steps and listened to the wind comb the eaves. The air moved through the new railing and made a low hum. "Hear that?" he asked. "The house is breathing." I closed my eyes and heard Declan sanding in the next room the way I used to, a rhythm, a patience, a care. When we lifted the 7th tread to replace its worn edge, I ran my fingers along the cavity where the first box had been and felt a shallow groove I hadn't noticed. We pried the trim free and found a narrow strip of wood carved on the hidden side. The letters were careful in a language that belonged to the ground we stood on. La casa es promesa. The house is a promise. I smiled and put my hand over the words, like you'd steady a child's hair in the wind. Declan had worked for years with crews from the Pueblos and picked up the words that matched the land. Of course, he left one here. We sealed the tread back in place and cleaned the sawdust from the floor. Later, when the heat finally bled from the day, I walked the rooms without turning on a light. Cedar oil paint coffee. The house answered back to each step with small living sounds. It had been a crime scene, a ledger, a battlefield. Now it was a vow again. There are things you build with timber, stone, and time. There are other things you build with memory, loyalty, and your decision to stay. Our home belongs to the second kind, and when the night air moves through the vent, Declan cut at 17 degrees north, it tells the same story in a language I didn't know I could still speak. We kept building.